We have a student who graduated in June, starting his Bachelor of Education in one of our high schools in our communities in Ashmont. This this opportunity, this young man would not be doing this otherwise. And his parents, his mom was in tears when she found out we could do this. And why can't we do it? It means thinking a little bit differently. It means asking for some flexibility. And I think this speaks to when we look at people who have been oppressed, who have been traumatized through many years of residential schools, etc. I feel we need to be pulling out all the stops to support them. The TRC does make a demand that we do something to narrow the achievement gap. And I think people are earnestly trying, but what does that actually look like? I think we need exemplars. I think we need to be thinking about what do we do differently.
I continue to be impressed with the work of so many educators in our country in making efforts to make the Indigenous learning component of every school and district as rich and meaningful as possible. And admittedly, there are still lots of gaps, and I know that districts are searching to do more and better. Today, I talk with Peter Barron, Superintendent in St. Paul Education, and Peter has taken upon himself as a veteran educator to take a real deep dive into this in his dissertation. And he is working very, very intently to try and really understand what it is that we can be doing in our schools to truly provide Indigenous students with the best possible opportunity. And not that people aren't already making those efforts, but he's going above and beyond in terms of looking at the research and really thinking about the most practical ways. And today he shares some of the things that he is helping to lead in the school district out in Eastern Alberta. And I've known Peter for a lot of years, and my original connections with Peter revolve around technology. He was technology leader in Elk Island Public Schools near Edmonton in my previous tenure with Discovery, and that's how we first connected. But great to see Peter really taking a real hard stance at how we can make Indigenous learning better for certainly his students and the community he serves, but hopefully that research will be shared with others and people can benefit from it as well. So enjoy my conversation today with Peter Barron, Superintendent of St. Paul Education. I have been in St. Paul and have engaged with your school division previously, but I was really unaware of kind of the unique integration of St. Paul's school division. And quite honestly, I don't know if there's another school division in Canada that has the number of different components that yours do. Can you just tell us a little bit about what those components are and how they sort of work together?
Sure. So St. Paul is certainly original in Alberta for the fact that it's a Catholic and public school division altogether. So back in 1995, when amalgamation, Alberta reduced the number of school boards in the province, almost every school district was involved in that in some way. And at the time, there was a great relationship between the Catholic board and the public board. And so they decided that they would join forces. And so right now in our school division, we have 3 Catholic schools, but we also have a Mennonite school, a pretty large school in Two Hills, and three Hutterite colony schools. And as well, with where we are in relationship to 4 nations, about a third of our students would identify as First Nation students. So also there's a strong French community. So there's a Francophone district, which we're connected with, but also lots of French immersion. So for a small division, we have a fair amount of diversity.
So as somebody who's worked I think you previously just worked in the public sector, the non-Catholic school divisions. How have you noticed and appreciated how those two different school perspectives have been able to work together?
I think it works because there's a real healthy respect for diversity and difference. And, the seat of the diocese is in St. Paul. So Bishop Franken is here. So we're closely connected with the diocese, but also just respecting with the Mennonite community, they have a way of looking at the world. The Hutterites have a way of looking at the world. And it's kind of respecting worldview differences that we can't just, see them as imposing sort of Western notions of what's normal on other cultures. And I think that's what makes it work, is that people feel respected, that they can, their beliefs are acknowledged, and we don't try to change folks. Like that's not our goal.
I mean, it's such a powerful community and message to hear in the world that we live in today, where we don't do very well as a society in accepting other people and living with other people's worldviews. We want to completely, shift and change them. So I think it's fascinating, and I don't know. And how long, Peter, have you been in St. Paul now?
Well, I'm relatively new. This is just my second year. I started August of 23. Or 22 rather. So
Yeah,
just a year and a bit. Yeah.
yeah.
So still learning, right? So still learning
Mhm.
how those relationships work. But again, amazed myself that given the complexity, that there is a lot of harmony.
And is there a lot of opportunities even to interact? I mean, I know in most scenarios, when I think about Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario, who still have the Catholic districts, oftentimes there's not a lot of interaction. But what about with you? Are there opportunities for those schools to interact with one another?
For sure. Like, mean with Catholic school with a public school, or oh, for sure. And I think it's because of our size, right? So, the leaders all know each other. Our leadership meetings are together, and we there's a lot of cooperation in terms of programming or sharing of resources, sharing of PD. We do differentiate some PD. So there is Catholic formation opportunities that would be different. But I would say by and large, schools are, you know, very much alike, right? Are reading, teaching kids to read, sharing resources, very similar. So yeah, there's a fair amount of opportunity for staff to work together. And if there's a new principal at the Catholic school, their mentor principal may be from a public school.
Right, right. Yeah. No, I mean, and I think, again, as much as we often hone in on what makes us different, there's, generally speaking, way, way more about us that's the same. And, how do you celebrate the differences and yet connect on what makes us all the same? You have recently begun your PhD. You're just in the midst of that. So tell me what it is that just made you decide, I think this is something that this is the right time to do it, and talk a little bit about your dissertation and how it actually is supporting the work in St. Paul itself.
Sure. Just to correct right away, it's an EdD, and there is a difference between the PhD and the EdD. The EdD has a more practical focus. It's more for scholar practitioners. So yeah, and I've been thinking about this for a number of years. And then in the last couple of years, thought, you know what, there's a problem of practice that is so important, I think, for our community, but for all communities. And I would say across Canada, across North America, and really around the world, is the underachievement or the opportunity gap that Indigenous students face, racialized kids face. And when we look at statistically, important things like graduation rates, and I know that's a contestable topic when you talk about what does success mean for kids. But graduation rates, by and large, most people would say, yeah, that's an important metric. And transition to post-secondary. And in Alberta, and not unlike elsewhere, that success rate is significantly below non-Indigenous students by around 20%. And statistically, not finishing high school correlates really highly with, well, just a lower income over time, less health, less participation in society. There are all kinds of outcomes that are, impacted by that. So that is the problem that I've been very curious about. And and part of the challenge is that, post-secondaries, PhDs, researchers explore these topics, but a lot of their findings never make it to the field. Something like 17% of knowledge created by universities, by and large, ever makes the field within 10, 15 years. So I was thinking, well, maybe the answers are out there, and it's hidden behind this wall of academia.
Right.
And I found out that's kind of true. That we don't readily have access to academic papers with and easily. And so I thought, yeah, this is something I want to inquire into, especially that a third of our students do identify as First Nations. So what are the systemic barriers? What's getting in the way? From a policy perspective, like what can we implement from policy perspective, but also in the minds of people. And we all know this, right? We know this from research from 50 years ago, that if you tell a teacher, you know, here's a class of grade 6 students, they're the best students. We've handpicked these students out of grade 5. They're the best kids in the school. And guess what? They're just randomly chosen, and those kids outperform by the end of the year. And why is that? Because of high expectations, because of more support. And we know that when people have higher expectations, they take longer to explain something new. And if a child is struggling, they provide more support. So, looking into things like unconscious bias, deficit thinking are all part of that. So to me, there's a whole range of things we can do. And the dissertation, when I'm in the middle of year 3 and writing chapter 1. So by next June, should have it all written and know a lot more than I do today about what are some very specific strategies we can employ that will be really meaningful, and how can we mobilize that information? In other words, share it with other school divisions in Alberta. And this is something that's on, it's in terms of Alberta, it's the number 2 goal of the business plan for Alberta education. And I'm sure it exists in the teaching quality standard, leadership quality standard, and superintendent leadership quality standard to do something about this. If people want to, but what do we do? Where is
Right.
where is the guidance coming from to do that? So
So give me a quick, just
yeah,
one. I mean, as you said, you're not finished here. There's a lot more for you to learn yet. But of what you've studied so far, can you give us an example of like one strategy that you said this actually might make a difference that maybe folks aren't really doing right now?
well, one thing that we have already employed is, and it's a barrier for all kids kind of in rural communities, is access to universities, right? So typically, historically, you had to leave the community and go to Edmonton, for example, and enroll in if you live in Edmonton, you drive down the road and you're at any institution you want to go to. So I think it's been a bit of a consequence of COVID and more ready acceptance of online courses. As a Portage College here in town is a small site, and they're affiliated with University of Calgary and the U of A as well. So kids can stay in our community and start a Bachelor of Education or nursing program. But even for kids living on reserve, that can still be a significant barrier. So we've asked them if we could put a site in one of our high schools. So students who are going to that school for the last 12, 13 years can continue and get some support from us just in terms of getting going, making sure that they're being supported and start. And so we have a student who graduated in June, starting his Bachelor of Education in one of our high schools in our communities in Ashmont. This opportunity, this young man would not be doing this otherwise. And his mom was in tears when she found out we could do this. And why can't we do it? It means thinking a little bit differently. It means asking for some flexibility. And I think this speaks to when we look at people who've been oppressed, who have been traumatized through many years of residential schools, et cetera. I feel we need to be pulling out all the stops to support them. And what can we do? What policies can we shift? And it means equity doesn't mean equal, right? We all know that. And so there's an additional efforts and resources need to be put in that direction to make that difference. And to me, this
Well, and
ties
it's
in with truth and reconciliation. This ties into
that's right.
what the TRC is about, right? The TRC does make a demand that we do something to narrow the achievement gap. And I think people are earnestly trying, but what does that actually look like? I think we need exemplars. I think we need to be thinking about what do we do differently. And
Well, and we need stories, Peter. The story you just told me is like powerful. Like I think about like a mom in tears because of what might be seen as maybe not easy, but actually kind of a simple solution in some respects, right?
yeah, it's yeah, exactly. It's a simple solution, and it's just making a little switch in thinking. And I believe this will help all kids, right? Portage opening its doors, University of Calgary having the smarts to say, hey, we need to look at broadening the concept of campus, right? Not everybody needs to come to the buildings in Calgary to learn. And, my doctoral work is not, I don't physically go to London, Ontario until hopefully graduation in a year. So we need to think differently and open up the doors for us to explore other ways of providing education to kids and encouraging them and going out of
Hmm.
our way to encourage them.
Well, and the University of Calgary and all the institutions in Edmonton and everywhere are all facing a little bit of a similar issue and that they're looking for students, right? So
Right.
there's this is benefiting institutions as well. And you being the conduit to help them think differently. And some things you don't think about, as privileged as you and I are in many respects. You talk so there's the distance, right, of having to get yourself to Edmonton or wherever to go to school. But as you're describing placing it in the high schools themselves, even if they have the means to get to those places, I think for many kids in those environments, just the level of comfort of just not being comfortable in a space like that and with as large numbers of students who have who they may be perceived as having more advantages than they have, like all of those are, I mean, then you can just list the barriers that could go on around why a student might say like, no, that's not for me, when in terms of their academic and their passions, it is for them, but these other constraints are in the way. So I think what you've done is eliminated more than just the distance barrier. I think there's other barriers that this addresses as well.
Well, I quite agree. And again, and this is a challenging thing is to always think about, a difference of worldviews. Our view of university is not necessarily an Indigenous perspective on universities. And we think of universities as molding minds, bringing people in and changing them. Indigenous perspective is maybe not to be changed. And can they do that without having to leave home? And that, like there's many nuances to all of this that I think are super important for us to be very thoughtful around and to work, really well with our elders and to seek advice and to get feedback on this journey as we try different things, making sure we don't trample over other people's cultures.
Well, I applaud you in pursuing this, Peter. I think this is going to be not just beneficial for you and St. Paul, but I think sharing this research with other communities is going to be powerful too. So I look forward to kind of watching your journey. Shifting gears a little bit, when you and I first connected, and I don't know, we're going back probably about a decade. I think you were at Elk Island at the time, and you
Right.
were very involved in technology. In fact, I think that was your portfolio at the time, was a technology portfolio. So knowing that that's also a big part of your background, how would you describe maybe the evolution of technology in your own leadership journey from when you first started, utilizing it and thinking about it as a classroom application to where you are today?
Yeah, it has been, well, it's something I've always been interested in. And I know this will narrow down some dates, but, when I started teaching, the Apple IIe's were just coming in. So that'll let people know how long I've been doing this. And when I saw from the very beginning the potential for people to have, as an English teacher, students having access to word processing, what advantages I saw for that. And and certainly what's changed things in the last 20 years is the advent of internet and kind of the ubiquitous nature of computers now, and how, with Chromebooks, how inexpensive they've become. So accessibility has increased significantly. When I was in high school, a calculator, I remember in grade 10, the the teacher said, you can have a calculator, but you can't use it on tests because not everybody has one. So that accessibility has changed. And I've seen significant progress, but I still think there's quite a lot of room to grow here. I think, if you look at it from the perspective of the SAMR model, I think many folks are still using technology as a substitution, augmentation type of tool. But not everywhere for sure. But I think we need more modeling of that, and more exemplars, and more professional learning for staff to make some of those shifts, to try things out. If you haven't experienced that kind of learning in your career or as a learner, then I think it's for some folks harder to implement. So, but having said that, we have some schools that are doing some marvelous things around technology, not just computer technology, but, and my thinking's kind of evolved into more, you know, the pedagogy around that, around using either project-based learning or land-based learning kinds of opportunities, and giving students a variety of opportunities to show their learning, and to do authentic tasks. I think that's really important, that we ask students to solve problems that are real and connected to their community, as opposed to something artificially created by the teacher or by the publisher. So, yeah, I think that's still a big interest for me, and ensuring that, you know, we have the students have access to technology, and that we're supporting supporting our staff as much as possible to do really interesting, authentic work with them, with that technology. I've always thought, if the technology can do something that we couldn't otherwise do, then that's really the goal. Like something that's
Right.
really creative and for the world, right? The old adage, if it's for the teacher, it just has to be good enough. But if it's for the world, if you're publishing our projects, then kids will put more into it. And I think
Has to be
that
good.
ties in really nicely with PBL.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing that I think has become evident to me of late, especially, is, I think, and you kind of mentioned access and equity as part of it. And we recognized, I think, as an institution early on, how important it was to make sure that kids had access, and that, it wasn't just those that had the financial means to have that. And that still is, I think it's still is an issue, but what's I think about now is something like understanding and accessing, the generative AI tools that exist, for kids that understand how to utilize those tools,
Cool.
or teachers, they have a super unfair advantage, if you will, to those that don't. And so just creating some equity opportunities for our young people and our teachers to understand something as emergent as that. Like, there's an urgency to make sure that the equity conversation we don't lose it, because there could be a pretty big gap, and in some cases, maybe there already is.
Yeah, no, for sure. And equity, well, equity is in social justice. It comes back to, in your, for all leaders have to contemplate in a very serious way, what do they think their role is? Like, why are you doing this work? And what do you think the job really is? I mean, part of it is running the division, running a school, but are you trying to achieve something? Are you trying to change the trajectory of kids' lives? And bringing that sense of equity, that, we, I'm a privileged person, and I want to, commit to using my privilege to support people who are privileged. to make that difference. And that has to be part of my leadership, perspective. And again, equal access to everyone is a big part of what I believe our role is as educators, is to make that difference. Many kids will just do well. They have lots of adult supports. And, going back to the earlier topic around university, if a child has parents who went to post-secondary, they have a huge advantage over the folks who are going to post-secondary for the first time. They're the first in their family to do so. It's a big advantage.
Right.
And how do we provide support? How do we ensure that those who are going for the first time are not disadvantaged? Going back to that previous question, to me, it is an issue of equity. Like equity
Right.
is a key driver. Social justice, key drivers in my work.
Absolutely. No, and I think that's obviously evident in your dissertation and just in your career in general. So again, thank you for that. So just to wrap here, I always like to ask a couple questions that are not as maybe heavy and specifically the leadership focus, and again, I know given the fact that you're in the midst of some pretty heavy post-secondary work, maybe this is where this leads, but maybe not. So what are you reading and listening to today? Maybe that's not. It could be part of your work, I guess. That would be the easy way out. But maybe there's other things you've been reading or listening to that you've enjoyed the last little while.
You're right. A lot of my reading, we have to read a whole lot, so that takes up consumes a lot of time. But other interests for me are areas around health. I'm very interested in books around longevity, health choices, nutrition. Those are topics that are really interesting to me. I like to read about how experts disagree on, what's a really good diet or how to extend life and live life well, health span versus lifespan, that type of
Mm-hmm.
idea. So really curious about that. And I do read some books on that area. Yeah.
Anything that you've been watching lately when you just maybe want to get away from it all and just escape? Any of those kind of shows?
Well, I've been a lifelong fan of science fiction. I remember I'm one of those kids who would, in high schools, go to the library on Saturday and pick out a science fiction book, and I would find an author and I would read everything in that author. So, so going back to that, a series I read in high school, Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, his trilogy, has been made into a series on Apple TV. Second season just came out, so I just finished watching that. Fascinating how they've interpreted Asimov's work and really modernized it. Asimov, really an author of the 50s and so on, where
Right.
every protagonist is male. And so Foundation is the TV version is matched. Switch that up and give female characters a much stronger role. So, and played around with the plot a little bit. So quite a science fiction fan, and that's been fun to watch.
So again, I said I've been to St. Paul, but if someone's never been to St. Paul, or maybe they're coming for a second time, what are some of the they don't have to be lesser known, just because I think oftentimes when I ask this question, I'm talking to somebody from an urban center where people might already have some knowledge of the space and place. But for visitors coming to St. Paul, is there any kind of go-to little restaurant or community spot or something that might be worthwhile checking out?
Well, we're known as Lake Country, and so there are just some beautiful lakes in the area. Whitney Provincial Park is just on the road from St. Paul toward Elk Point. And there's the Borden Trail. So there's an eschar that was a ridge created by glaciers millennia ago, and some great hiking, fishing, boating. So the area is it's gorgeous drives in the country and it's called the Lake District for a good reason. So if you're into camping and outdoor activities, this is really a great place to come.
That's awesome, Peter. I think that's you didn't mention the alien landing spot, which people can figure that out on their own. No, that was kind of the one that always comes to mind, is that like St. Paul's got, if aliens ever come, you guys are set up for that. So We can let people, if they don't know that, they can maybe search that out and
Yes,
find
that's
out.
yeah, a good centennial project, and yeah, it's I think well, in fact, it's influenced. I think one of our hotels is called the Landing, so there's some influence of the community from that, and people just smile when they talk about it.
Yes, that's right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Peter. I know we had to go back and forth a few times to find an open spot for you, but appreciate you making the time for this, and all the best with the rest of the school year and your dissertation and your learning as well.
Thank you so much, and it was a real pleasure to chat with you and reconnect after a few years.